Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Galea, Kindler of Hope. This is a equipment kind of combo deck, a high power deck that comes to us from Mono Mana Maniac, who says, need to have a fresh set of eyes on it. Probably need a few more lands, but I'm so attached to every card. Interaction is also pretty light too, maybe? The deck has never actually been in a game before. As for budget, they say none really, but it's a physical list and I don't have any reserved list cards. Absolutely, we can work on this for sure. But before I go any further, I would heavily recommend that you take this list as is, regardless of what I say in the rest of the video, and go play it. The most important part of building a deck, brewing, and getting better at the experience is actually playing the games and seeing if you can suss out what is wrong. I think it's easy to kind of look at the advice I give in a kind of like bubble and just think that they're rules to consistently follow. You know, always play X amount of lands, always have a bunch of card draw that isn't, limited to your deck functioning. These kind of things are really good signposts, but at its core, you do have to figure out what the deck is missing out on, and it's hard to tell without the experience of playing it, and the experience of the play group you play it with. Unless you're going to go and do this on MTGO or at Commander Night at a store you've never been before, you have some familiarity with the people you play this deck with, or you will soon. And you will have to keep that in mind as we work on the deck and as we build it into what exactly we want it to be. So, I'm not saying pause the video and don't watch it until you play it. Absolutely watch the rest of the video, but I think you're doing yourself a bit of disservice and you're doing the deck a disservice if you haven't gone and gave it a bunch of, tests before, seeing what someone else has to say. I say this with the knowledge that I definitely have decks that I have played with once and gone, you know what, I don't like this, I'm gonna take it apart. I have several decks right now that feel that way, and I should probably listen to my own advice and play them a bit longer, but I'm probably not going to do that. Alright, let's take a look at the commander and see what we can do. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So, who's Galea, Kindler of Hope, and why is she our equipment combo commander? Is it Galea or Galea? I don't know. She is a 4/4 elf knight in Bant colors for 4 mana, so 1 green, white, blue. She has vigilance and she has 2 main abilities. The first one is that you can look at the top card of your library anytime. Though many would say that's not an ability, I play with several people actually who delight in the ability to look at their top card repeatedly ad nauseum, no matter how dead they are on board. But that main second ability is you may cast aura and equipment spells from the top of your library. When you cast an equipment spell this way, it gains, when this equipment enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. This is a really interesting wording for this ability to basically give, an auto-equip onto your equipment, but unsurprisingly, this is not a build-around commander in the traditional sense, but an accentuator. Like, this is something that works really well when you're deep in equipment and aura, and you don't need to go all in on a commander. She's a very good support commander for the strategy, but you don't need to worry about having to cast her on curve every single time. Looking at the deck itself, we could go straight into the land talk, we can talk about the curve, but before we do, well, first I want to say I really do like the deck. I think it is very strong as is, but that's kind of what I want to talk about, because if you open up this deck yourself, you can kind of see that this deck has a bit of a power problem. What do I mean by that? I think this is something we see in decks every now and then on this channel, where the decks themselves have a very strong half and a not so strong half. So if I were to sit down here and say, well, this is a commander deck about playing equipment and attaching it to your creatures and attacking, I'd be kind of lying to you. Don't get me wrong, that might have been the intention, or that might be the main game plan, but when I look at this deck actually, considering the tutors the deck runs, considering the fast mana, considering our commander, what this deck actually is a combo deck whose purpose is to cast as many of these equipment spells almost as cantrips off of the top of the deck until you assemble one of our two main win cons, one of which would be Dramatic Reversal on Isochron Scepter for infinite mana, and Urza to then use that infinite mana to cast every spell in your deck and win that way. Or alternatively, over here is once you have that infinite mana or infinite casts, Aether Flux Reservoir will gain you infinite life and you will just burn out your opponents one at a time. That to me is the primary purpose of the deck, just with this power level. And our deck builder didn't talk about this, so I'm going to operate on the idea that deck builder is seeing both sides at the same time. So what I would do is, if you want this deck to be stronger, I would go further and further into this combo side, and then I would kind of eschew, you know, some of the cuter equipment, such as the Swords of Feast and Famine, the Swords of Cycle here, can easily be cut. In fact, I would even cut the One Ring, but we'll get back to that later. I would cut almost everything that's 3 mana and up that doesn't directly affect the goal of comboing off, and run the deck that way. However, if you came into this deck with the intention to equip cards to creatures, well, perhaps we've gone a little too far. Perhaps we've gone so deep into the power of this deck that we've kind of lost the vision, if that makes sense. So I'm still going to suggest things at a nice milieu place that I'll leave it up to you to decide which direction to go into. But I just wanted to note that I can see the kind of division of the deck, and I'm sure anyone who looks into this can see that as well. It's not a bad division, and I think in the right group it'll do very well, but I think maybe picking a direction you'll have a better time. Speaking of lands, now, I don't think this is a deck that needs to go all the way up to like 38 lands, far from it. As we see with the curve, our curve is small. I love this. This is also what makes the deck so aggressive, is that we have such a small curve of a total of 7 cards, 6 if we remove the commander, 5 if we remove the Halvar for the swords. We got 5 4-mana cards in the entirety of the deck. That's fantastic, and we don't need a big curve for that. Then you add in all of the fast mana, all of the, we've got Mana Vault in here, the mana positive mana rocks. We really don't need that much land. However, that being said, I wouldn't mind if we went up to at least 35. Looking at the collection we have here, it looks like we are playing most of the fetch lands that we have access to. Are we missing any? I guess we could be missing the ones that search for just basics. Prismatic Vista, I believe, is the only one we're missing. And I think you could probably get away with playing that as well. Like, we're playing Fabled Passage, we might as well play Prismatic Vista. But even then, what's the Triome? Are we playing the Triome? Yes, we are. Okay. Otherwise, I think generally we're pretty good. Going up to 35 lands with the addition of 1 fetch land, and then maybe Ash Barrens to cycle as well for a basic. I think that'd be more than enough. The reason I'm talking about fetches is because the ability to shuffle the top of your deck is pretty important in a deck like this, because you're going to have a hard time otherwise going off consistently if you can't occasionally adjust your draws. Speaking of the other cards in the deck, and I've already touched on a few of these, and I will touch on 2 of them again. So let's talk about the One Ring. I fully understand that what I'm going to say may sound a bit controversial, but I really don't think this spell is that good in Commander. A big part of its power level in 60-card formats with 1 opponent is its ability to repeatedly draw you cards in a short amount of turns, right? You play One Ring, you draw a card. You go to your next turn, you draw 2 cards. Over 2 turns, you've gotten 3 cards. It comes back to you again. All of a sudden, you've drawn another 3 cards, that puts you to 6, you're at a huge advantage. But when we compare that to Commander, we have a bit of a problem. Because, yeah, sure, you play this for 4 mana, you gain protection, and you tap and you draw 1 card, but it's 3 additional turns until you get that second untap, right? And now you get 2 cards, and it's 3 more additional turns. I know that's just kind of how Commander works. Like, that's like me explaining to you that, oh my goodness, your upkeep takes longer to get to in Commander, and you'll be like, well, yeah, Curse, that's how Commander works. But it's true, right? And we should value these cards based on that power as opposed to, you know, like how it feels to use, how it feels like, oh my goodness, over 4 of my turns, I drew what, like 10 cards. No, over like 12 turns, you drew 10 cards. And during that time, you've made the greatest target on your back because, as I let in, everyone thinks that One Ring is super, super busted. That being said, also at this power level, the ability for your opponents to counter the ring is really, really high, so tapping out for the One Ring feels kind of suspect. I think you can keep it. I just don't think it's one of the strongest things you can do. Going back to the Swords of, I believe all 3 of these can be cut no matter whether we go into a more aggressive build. I mean, if you really want the equipment build, you can keep them because they are very strong and very cute. I don't mean that in a bad way, but kind of like fun cards, especially Feast and Famine. That's my favorite one that I own. Hearth and Home is great too, but these are just so much mana for a deck like this. With such few creatures to actually attach these cards to, and such few ways to consistently attach them, it's not the freest thing. Like, I can't believe I need to suggest this, but, and we'll get to this, but we're not even playing Sigarda's Aid, right? We don't really mean to attach these equipments, so if we play this, we have to pay the full cost to attach it, and that's a big cost for this deck. That is a big time that your mana is down and your opponents are going to destroy your creatures. And we'll get to the counterspells to protect you in a second, but I don't really think you have the means to do so. So for me, they're generally cuts. Nettle Cyst, likewise, once again, falls in the same kind of package of just like, maybe a little too cute at 3 mana for a deck like this. Don't get me wrong, it's a very efficient card. It comes with its own body. If they remove the body, then you get to keep the Nettle Cyst. It's in that way it survives board clears. But at this power level, people are either ignoring this card or they're removing the Nettle Cyst. In fact, I would say generally in decks at this power level or even below, like mid power level, Living Weapon is kind of weaker because everyone comes into Commander with a certain amount of artifact and enchantment destruction, right? Nettles's power of being like, oh, I'm difficult to deal with, fades away when someone Nature's claims it, or Beast Within's it, or a Midnight, Stroke of Midnight. That's the one, this card, right? So Nettlesys becomes a lot less of a flashy kind of hard to deal with threat. And instead, it's just an overly expensive Urza Saga's token, right? So to me, that's another card that I don't mind cutting for sure. Looking through the rest of the equipment, especially the lower mana equipment, I have no problem with. I'm going to take a moment just for myself to talk about how much I hate this card. I swear to goodness, I hate this card. It is really good in this deck, and you should absolutely play it. I hate this card. This is everything I hate about Magic. This is the main reason I hate blue. All it does is cantrip, and that's not good. That is not something proactive you are doing, and it is getting you nowhere but wasting time. However, it is uniquely strong in a deck like this, and I will not fight you on it. I really don't like this card, but absolutely play it. Just don't play it with me. Be kind. Think of my time. Looking at our instance, this is something I wanted to touch about on our counterspells. Now, I am going to suggest a counterspell myself, which I hope is going to fit the power level a little better. But I think Mana Drain and Pact of Negation both feel a little too clunky at this power level. Pact of Negation mainly because that upkeep cost is really high, and though you can use it strategically, especially in something that's pseudo CEDH like this, I don't think this deck has the means to do that. Like, this is really good in an ad nauseum deck. Once again, I am not a CDH pro, so please take my comments in stride or with a grain of salt. But Pact of Negation is good off of ad nauseum because you basically get a huge one-turn combo with like a million cards in your hand, and you just naturally have protection that's easy to put off ad nauseum and can be cast with no fear of the upkeep because you're going to lose the game anyways if you don't win. So no problem here. Whereas in a deck like this, I don't think you're going to be in that situation often. I think it is a lot of work for you to win. In fact, a lot of it is on board and interactable. And so even with silence backup, there's going to be situations where you're going off the top of your deck to combo off, and then Pact of Negation is just going to be on top of your deck needing to be shuffled away. And that's going to suck. Yeah, you can draw it and hold on to it, but like, it's not as good protection in a situation like this, especially if your opponents can, force you to use it, stop your combo, and then you just don't have the mana to go off, especially if targeted removal will cut you below 5 mana. Yeah, I don't particularly like it here. Likewise, Mana Drain is a card that has a strange reputation. Don't get me wrong, it's a very strong card, but it is, how do I put this? It has a bit of a dip in its power. And the reason is, and that dip happens later on the power scaling than you'd expect it to be. So as our decks get stronger, our general CMC goes down. As that goes down, Mana Drain gets worse and harder to cast because it's too blue, and that cost becomes more and more, restrictive the higher power level we get to, because we have only so much colored mana and everyone's going so fast. So we're probably countering something 2 to 3 mana that we need to do. So for example, someone's casting Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, or Thorn Amethyst, or something like this, or a Rule of Law effect. We absolutely need to stop that because that completely interferes with our combo. But Mana Drain isn't really going to get a good return on those spells. So we're using Mana Drain like Counterspell with the addition of getting 2 to 3 extra mana, which isn't bad, don't get me wrong, but not really where this card shines. I would much rather it be Arcane Denial, because at least you get to draw next upkeep and you're still in the game and still building towards, your win, as opposed to being down 1 card in exchange for, some mana, which I don't think is the greatest deal in a deck like this. So I would really rather Mana Drain be something else. In lower like power levels, Mana Drain is so scary because everyone's running around with 6, 7 drops, and you get to counter it and feel really good about the tremendous amount of mana you're making. Here, I don't think we should be counting on that. I would also add, if you are in a pod or a group of people who are dropping 7 drops as their main interaction or way of playing the game, and you brought Mana Drain, you're a bad person. Don't be that person. Take out your weaker deck, your cheaper deck, for sure. Looking at a few other cards, Nature's Lore and 3 Visits feel a little out of place in a deck that's so low to the ground with great fetch lands, so it has really good mana. Why are we using these? I want to, and I will be replacing them with Mana Dorks, because I think we just need more creatures to equip our equipment to, and both of these I feel are just not ideal. They are, once again, cards that we can't cast off the top, we can't attach equipment to. They're what I would consider double the mana cost they need to be in a deck like this, and overall, I don't know, I think they are a crutch that the deck doesn't need. All right. I think that's generally most of my notes. I don't have that many additions, or it doesn't feel like I have that many additions. So let's get right into them. So starting off right away, we've got Birds of Paradise, and I've written up here, and other dorks. I'll leave this up to you of how many you want to play, but Birds of Paradise and then Noble Hierarch is probably where I would start. And the reason is I just want a few mana dorks. And I think it's easy to put Birds of Paradise and Noble Hierarch in replacement to those two mana spells, because they're just everything the deck kind of wants. The ability, when you have the means to cast Nissa's The Sword of the Animist, and where is Nissa's Animist, these two and equip them to Birds of Paradise to get that hidden to ramp feels really good and is really doable when they're 1 mana and with evasion. Now, Noble Hierarch doesn't have an evasion. You could instead play Gilded Goose, but I think Noble Hierarch is a little better. I think this will just be a little bit of a bump in mana, a little lower to the ground, and a pretty good turn 1 play. They also attract removal, which is something that I think is noteworthy because your deck really attracts removal. There's a lot of key pieces in your deck that are just worth taking out, from your commander to like Esper Sentinel to SRAM, that having just a few more targets that might attract some attention is really worthwhile on your end. Something else I didn't put later, but this can also be used with Knight Captain. Is that the one? Knight Captain of Eos. It's going to be fussy and not go searching. So we'll come back to this, but Ranger Captain of Eos, our 3 mana 3/3 creature that on you see I put the wrong one in. Ranger Captain. So Ranger Captain of Eos is a 3/3 creature that on ETB tutors for a 1 mana creature, and then on sacrifice is a pseudo silence. Both of these effects I think are incredibly powerful for you, but namely most of the time you'll be grabbing Esper Sentinel with this. I would say almost 99%. But if you need the mana desperately for some reason, or much more likely you've already got an Esper Sentinel, you can use this to grab either of the mana dorks, and I think you're pretty happy with that exchange. It also notably shuffles your deck, which might be worth thinking about when you're going off. And of course, the silence effect is very, very strong. Moving forward, one of the equipment that I've been really, really impressed with, and I think works very well in this deck, is Lava Spur Boots. This comes from Hammer Time, and it's not the last time we're going to talk about Hammer Time. This card that you can fetch off of Urza's Saga, that is incredibly cheap to play, has a very good ability in Ward 1 and a good ability in Haste, is just phenomenal overall. Attach it to a construct token, it hits even harder. If you attach it to literally like Esper Sentinel, all of a sudden Esper Sentinel gets much better. Taxing your opponent's 1 additional mana when you're holding back interaction can be very much so worth it by forcing your opponents to be, in a position where they just cannot answer everything. This is somewhat undone by a card in your deck that reduces the mana cost of all spells, which I did want to bring up, but I thought I'd leave because it is a very, very cute, very expensive card. Oh, it's not expensive. I'm a liar. But a very cute card. Spells cost 1 less to cast. I think this is going to get you killed more often than not, but I'll leave that in there for now. I think Lava Spur Boots will be a nice addition, low to the ground equipment that works both when you're comboing and on setup. I put Colossus Hammer in here, but then I realized you had Colossus Hammer already. So Cigar does Aid. It's a great time to mention I cannot spell. Sigarda's Aid. Sigarda's is what I wrote. I see. Sigarda's Aid, once again from Hammer Time, in my experience, is a fantastic enchantment that allows you to cast spells at instant speed. Now, this leans towards, you might say, the more equipment and equipping side of the deck, but I would like to note that this does work on the combo side if you want to soft cast a few cards on opponent's turns, keeping up mana for interaction, and then during their turns, casting equipment off the top of your deck at instant speed or out of your hand at instant speed. And the auto-equip, once again, is really, really important. I do think the deck is missing some more equip features, and this is a particularly good one. It's also 1 mana enchantment, so it fits right in, and I think you would be amiss by not playing it. Going to some higher mana creatures that really catch my eye, Quetzal feels like the best one, I would say, by far. Mainly, once again, for that silence effect and the additional draw effect. Both of these work really well. This doesn't say modified creatures, but it is technically basically modified creatures, and equipment will do that. Not all of your equipment. If it doesn't give power, it won't do it, or toughness, it won't do anything. No, it's just power. Yeah, if it doesn't give power, it won't do anything. That being said, it should. It makes once again, your Birds of Paradise or other equips really strong to draw your card here and there. You can draw up to 1 card per opponent you hit. really great, but we're really casting this for the silence, and I think you'll be very, very happy with getting this down. It's a very good, I guess the shields are down moment that allows you to make some very well-informed plays. There is also situations that you can get Kutzil out, and they just stay on the battlefield for a turn cycle. So as soon as that last opponent's, like, as soon as it gets back to you, like if you turn to this off of Birds of Paradise and your last opponent's end step just ends and it goes to your untap phase, you know this is in effect, right? It's immediately in effect, and you can start making really good decisions off of it. So I find this to be a very, very powerful card. Whereas Ranger Captain, you have to use that activated ability, and then people can respond, or silence, you have to cast this. This is much, much stronger. Another 3-mana modified thing is Kodama of the West Tree. Once again, this is probably closer to the equipment style of the deck than the combo side of the deck. Still very good. It is ramp. Giving trample to your modified creatures is also very, very good, because you do need to get those hits in if you want to trigger some of the effects. If you want to keep the Swords of, if you want to keep Nissa's Animus or the Sword of the Animist, that trample can make a really big difference. So I do like it both ways. And then of course, if you have, if it hits and you have Sword of the Animist and you have this out, right, that's double the amount of basics you get into play, and that's fantastic. Arden is here. I don't know if I want to suggest Arden. I just wanted to note that, once again, we're missing some equipments, and Arden's ability is very, very powerful, because it's a trigger that you just target a creature. You don't target the auras or equipment. So you target a creature and you wait for the trigger to resolve, and you then attach everything to it. Does it say anything? I'm pretty... Yeah. So you don't need to say what you're doing, and you don't need to say how you're rearranging things, and that's very, very powerful. Once if your opponents decide to bolt that creature or remove it in any other way, you can choose not to move. Like if they get tapped down, you don't have to move it, and if they die, you don't lose, like the equipment doesn't unattach, and that enables just a lot of pretty good plays. I don't think it belongs on the combo side at all, but that free equip, that free rearranging onto one creature can be very, very much so worthwhile, especially when you don't have Pure Steel Paladin. In Hammer Time, we use Forgenew, which with Pure Steel Paladin works very similarly. Basically, without going through all of this, is that it gives you instant speed equip on your turn, but you still have to pay the mana cost most of the time. Note most. But when you have Pure Steel Paladin and the cost of your equipment is always 0, Forgenew and that together allow you to flip cards around all the time. I don't know if I would suggest Forgenew. Once again, if you're going really hard into the equipment subtype and like actually equipping things, it can be good. But in the more powerful side of this deck, I don't think it's good enough. Oop, went a little too fast. This last one I thought was very interesting to me. Starnheim Courser. So we already have cards in the deck that say equipment costs 1 less to play. Or artifacts, I should say, cost 1 less to play. Starnheim Courser has this text, but happens to be a 2/2 creature with flying. Now, traditionally, there's a back and forth of whether or not a creature being an effect being on a creature is better or not when it's on a creature. And in lower power EDH, I would say generally it's worse to have it on a creature because everyone runs board wipes. But higher like level EDH, it doesn't matter, especially in CEDH, where people's main interaction points are counter magic. So it doesn't matter what it is, it's getting countered. And if someone's using something like Swan Song or an offer you can't refuse, we'll get back to that, they can't counter this anyways. Then, of course, the added bonus of attaching equipment to this is really, really nice, so that if you need to go into the B plan and you need to start swinging with equipment, well, the Pegasus has flying, and that's really nice for your plan. So this is a very innocuous card that I think could fit into the deck pretty well. Looking at some auras that I was thinking about, it might even just be this one, I'll have to get back to it, but Aqueous Form got my attention as it is very, very cheap to cast off of your deck with your commander out. That's the main thing I like about it, but that can't be block text is just really, really good, right? It just allows you to get a few hits in, it allows you to do things with, like, for example, the Urza's Saga construct that you otherwise couldn't, and the Scry one is not a shuffle, but it is manipulating your top deck, so it's not nothing. Am I super impressed by this card? No. But could you do much worse? Absolutely. I guess that was the only aura. Heroic Intervention is a card that is also notably missing. I don't know if you need to play it in the more combo version, but if you are not playing the combo version, your ability to deal with interaction and board clears is going to be very important, especially with so few creatures, and Heroic Intervention is going to do a lot of work. Going into other interactions, as you were asking, Swords to Plowshares, I feel like it's kind of a shame to be not playing it. It is, in my eyes, the most powerful removal spell in Commander. Just 1-for-1 with any creature, any like, obviously. I'm gonna say 1-for-1 with any creature, and someone's gonna point out that hexproof exists. It's just super efficient. Play this card. I don't need to explain it to you. And then the other one, as I alluded to earlier, an offer you can't refuse, is just really, really good on the, stop interacting with opponents who are trying to stop you from comboing off. For those who haven't played CEDH or don't know high level like thinking, and sorry, I mean high level as in high power level of decks, not necessarily, I'm not calling you dumb. Spells like an offer you can't refuse or Swan Song that give your opponent something in exchange for countering their spells should be the first of 2 counter spells you have in your hand. When you really need to stop something or interact with something that's stopping something, you use the first one. Use the first one being offer you can't refuse on their spell. And then, if you need to, you cast something else. Right? You don't use this as your primary, because if you use this as the last one, your opponents will get the treasure. But if you want to put your opponents in that situation that they need to counterspell your counterspell to get what they want to work, which happens a lot in CEDH, you want this to be the spell that they counter. That way you can use something like Arcane Denial. That way you can use Swan Song, which a 2/2 is much worse than 2 treasure tokens. Give them that instead, and they don't get the treasure tokens. Just a little bit of gameplay advice. And finally, we have Recommission, which I think is very, very powerful in your deck. It reanimates creatures and artifacts, 3 mana or less. And if we look at your deck, we've got 9 creatures that are 3 mana or less. And we have 33? Yeah, 33 creatures, which is, artifacts, which brings us up to 42% of your deck, right? That's math. That can be brought back with Recommission. And I think that's really, really strong. And it buys you back so many really powerful cards that you definitely need back, whether it be like combo pieces like Isochron Scepter, whether it be Pure Steel Paladin or SRAM, anything out here that the ability to just get it back, I think is very much so worth considering. And those are my thoughts on the deck. I really like it. I'm so glad you sent it. I'm really interested to see which direction it goes into, if it gets stronger or weaker. And I hope I was able to suss out your plans for it pretty well. But overall, and most importantly, actually, I still suggest you go and take the list as is and go play with it a bunch of times. See how it feels, see which direction you want to go into, because that's going to give you the most insight on what to do with the deck. My experience is I'm looking at the list, much like you have. And I can give you all the advice I can, but I haven't sleeved it and played it. But you can do that. And therefore, by doing that, you'll probably have the best idea in the end. I hope this video was useful to you, and good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.